Welcome. We are here in beautiful Italy for the PyMC Labs Retreat 2024. And I am sitting here with Jesse Grabowski. Welcome.
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good. Just thought we would talk about sort of where you came from and how you sort of discovered the joys of Bayes, the PyMC project itself. And what your journey was like.
The joys of Bayes. Like,
yes.
You get to feel the priors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sure. So my background is in economics. I did my undergrad at Michigan State University, where my very first statistics and economics professor was Jeffrey Wooldridge, who wrote a well-known textbook on frequentist econometrics. So I sort of started like right in the heart of that tradition. And economists are not known for branching out into the wider world of science. Mm-hmm. I had a big gap in my education, and I went back for a master's degree several years later. And I was doing finance, and finance was different to what I've done before. You have these huge data sets, stock market data going way, way back. And so I wanted to get into this hot new machine learning stuff, doing NLP on corporate filings, things like that. And so I took some Coursera classes about like how to fit a random forest, what's XGBoost. Mm-hmm. And that's cool, but it's very black box. If you're doing a classifier problem where you don't really care like which feature is the most important, you just want to like pour all the soup into it. I want to make like a 900 dimensional feature vector and just shove it through something. Mm-hmm. It works great. And people have worked backwards to get tricks on how can I figure out what matters, but it's certainly not happening that way from first principles. And all of the science that goes into those models happens in this very narrow feature engineering space. Mm. And that was kind of a letdown, That plus the fact that in these applied sort of economics questions that I was asking, there wasn't just these nice, clean classifier questions. You want to do a causal study. You want to do some kind of analysis where you're saying what's the effect of X on Y. Mm-hmm. So I kind of went back to the drawing board, and during one of these Coursera classes, they had presented PyMC as just there's this thing called Bayes, and like they do stuff with autodiff too. It's cool. All right, next thing. And I said, like, what about that Bayes thing? And I went back and I was really taken with it. I was taken with the freedom, the fact that you can write a model without any constraints. You don't have to fit it into like this linear regression format. I really like priors where you're not acting like science began today when I approach this question. And I really like that the Bayesian community at large has really embraced this like unipearl causality as a cornerstone of what we do. And it's almost superseded this notion of like priors and uncertainty. All that's important, of course, but I think people talk about causality a lot more in Bayesian circles these days.
Definitely. Yeah. We get hung up on things like uncertainty quantification and things like that, coverage properties, right? All these sort of inside baseball things that stats people are sort of super interested in, but oftentimes on the applied side of things, sort of what you can do is much more important than all these sort of technical things.
Because people, these are just tools at the end of the day, and it's easy to lose sight of that as someone who's working as a tool maker, where like, to me, it's really important that you can do like SVD, like how does it work? Like, how do we make it fast? But then there's an applied research that is just like, I found this formula in a paper and I really need to decompose these matrices. Like, what do you got for me? Mm-hmm. And none of that detail matters anymore. Like, it's that result that matters.
So after all of that, how did you end up sort of getting in contact with PyMC at a sort of deeper level?
Right. So when I was making this transition from frequentist to something else, I started hoovering up every single video I could find on the internet about Bayes, about PyMC. So it sort of like started about Bayes. I watched McElrath and Betancourt and all that. And then I found this guy, Zhuangpeng Lao, who's like a core contributor for a really long time to PyMC. He's giving a talk about likelihood functions or something. And just as a little side comment in passing, he says, like, I got involved by hanging out on the discourse on the forum and just answering people's questions. And eventually I hung out long enough that they were like, hey, want to be a developer? And I listened to that and I was like, I could do that. And so I did. I went and I hung out on the discourse, and you can go find my post history. The first posts are incredibly cringe. I said a lot of wrong things, but people were very patient and they didn't chase me out. And I sort of got better over time, both at answering questions, but also my skills improved more and more by looking at other people's problems. The things that I work on are narrow. Everybody works on some narrow set of questions, but then someone would come in and say, I need to figure out something about the distribution of bald eagle births in Canada. Okay, I'll see what I can do to help you. Mm-hmm. And you learn a little bit every time you do that. And that sort of snowballed into getting more engaged with the community and then eventually becoming a contributor, because the PyMC staff, the PyMC developer community are very warm, very open, but also very tricky and very sneaky. Because anytime you ask them a question, they're like, hey, you want to open a PR about that? Like, how about you do it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really great approach because it takes the problem into your own hands. It's something you actually care about. And then it turns you into a developer as long as you stick with it. And people are very patient, and they'll walk you through the process of learning all these soft Git skills that, like, writing actual Python is like this much of the process. It's mostly like managing your branches and, oh, I screwed up a push. Like, how do I fix it? Or there's this test from 3 years ago. Like, what does it do? How do I update it to fit my case? And people like Ricardo, one of the, I guess he's the head developer, is very patient and will hold your hand and walk you through it. You'll put a PR. He's like, no, that's all wrong. Like, I'll just rewrite it, and then your name is still on it anyway, right? So it's that kind of community is really great.
Yeah, the slippery slope from asking questions to helping answer some questions to noticing that a bit of functionality is sort of inconvenient or sort of maybe not quite right in some way. To why don't you open up an issue so that everyone sort of is aware of this, to why don't you start to work on fixing that issue is a very slippery slope. And yeah, it's very easy to get sort of sucked in.
It's good. I mean, it's a good slippery slope. They're usually not good, but this one is great.
Yes, it's great. And it really is sort of welcoming, I have found. So within the PyMC project, are there sort of parts that you have been focusing on or parts that you are particularly sort of excited about?
Absolutely. So I am this kind of, I'm a bit of like self-serving. I guess it was like the start of my motivation. It's grown since then, but I came into the dev side because I was working on my PhD research, which is about these structural macroeconomic models. And I sort of had this like, I don't know, like a lady who swallows the fly problem, where it's like, I need this thing, but then to get that, I need this other thing. And then that causes another problem, and that causes another problem, that causes another problem. So I've been working a lot in PyTensor, which is the computational backend to PyMC based on Theano, where I've been implementing a lot of linear algebra routines, either from scratch because they're not there. There are these control theory things like solving Lyapunov equations or discrete Riccati equations, and I added those in. But then also we found that a lot of these matrix decompositions didn't have gradients, so we added those. And that sort of grew into working on time series and these state space models, adding in more functionality to help people work with time in their PyMC models. And so
after sort of being both a user of PyMC and then sort of working on the internals a bit more, you have been working with labs. And so what things have you been working on? How's that experience been?
Yeah, so my PhD work, or my master's work, my PhD work is in finance. And so we were really fortunate to have a financial client who wanted some work done. And that was my first project. And it was like really, I mean, I just hit a home run in terms of like luck on what I was going to be working on and who I was going to be working with, because the team is really great and the project was really great and it went really smoothly. And so it was just a really, really positive experience. Labs, it has a very open culture. It has a very, I'm going to say academic culture, but I want to clarify that I mean that in the best way possible. Not that we fight over who gets citations on our work, but that you have experts from a huge array of disciplines, and they look at problems from these different aspects. And everybody kind of has their own vocabulary and their own kit of models that they've been trained how to approach. So you'll say like, oh, you know, we're fitting stock values or something. And then someone who has a baseball analytics background will come and be like, oh, this is actually a special case of this situation with time series, and you can look at it like this and use this model. And you would just never have that in an environment where everybody's an economist and everybody sort of knows the same set of skills. So it's really, really great.
Yeah. A bunch of brilliant people with a bunch of sort of complementary knowledge bases and skills.
And you cannot predict how, like when you make these like connections in the knowledge graph, like you cannot predict sort of like what will come of that. It's really nonlinear and it's really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me today from beautiful Italy.
Beautiful Tuscany, no doubt.
Yes, gorgeous.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.